Hello, and welcome to another episode of the D Shift podcast. And today I am really, really happy to be able to introduce you to just a woman who's done amazing things in her life. So I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Kim Harms. She is, now I'm going to read this so I don't mess this up. She has worked as a commissioned officer for the United States Public Health Service. She has been a civil mediator, a death doula, and a clinical dentist. She was also the first woman president of the Minnesota Dental Association. She's been a longtime speaker for the National Dental Association, and she's a best-selling author and a speaker. And I wasn't kidding when I said she's done a whole bunch of stuff in life. So, Dr. Kim, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Marty. It's such a privilege to be here. Basically, I'm old and I just keep going. So I just add one thing after the other, right? I just can't stop. I tried to retire. I failed. So I went into other things. So, but thank you so much. It's just a delight to be here.
Yeah. And I've got to say, retirement doesn't appeal to me. People always say, I can't wait to retire. I'm thinking like, I want to be able to do my own thing, but I love working and networking and getting to know people and learn new things. So, Dr. Harms, tell us a little bit about what got you into this area and sort of how your life has evolved to this point.
Well, the reason I'm so excited about talking on a podcast discussing divorce is I was a child of divorce, but I was also widowed. And when my husband died about 4 years ago, I realized that we widows and people who are divorced have a lot in common.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the divorce is harder on a person. Sometimes the widowhood is harder on a person. But the loneliness and they're trying to recreate our identity and the issues that we need to face when we come home and we're not part of a couple anymore are very, very similar. And I've worked for the last 3 years really trying to help widows overcome some of these issues and problems. I was a former grief counselor, and I just thought, wow, people who are divorced, they need a ministry too, because really they're suffering very similar issues after a divorce.
Yes, and I'm sorry for the loss of your husband. I lost my husband in 2017, and I was divorced in my 30s or late 30s. So there are a lot of similarities because you basically go from a we to a me in both of those situations, right? So let's look a little bit about, well, what do you think women maybe need to be prepared for about that sense of going from a spousal unit to a single individual person? What are some of the things that you think come up for people that they don't necessarily think about?
The thing for me was because I was 64 when my husband died, which the average age for widowhood is about 65. So I'm like right there in the average. What I didn't realize was the loneliness, because I'm a very independent person. I'm very busy. I have 6 grandchildren. I have all these things that I'm doing. But the fact that I no longer had someone in the home that knew that, like, I was at the grocery store, I had taken a trip and where I was and what I was doing. And I remember after Jim passed away, I had some surgery, and then it was during COVID, so they kind of sent me back early. So I was in the house and had some allergic reactions, and so I was not feeling well in my home. And I was laying there thinking, well, if I died, I wonder how long it would take for them to find the body. I mean, I really went way down the hill, because that loneliness can be so devastating. And I think we need to be prepared for that. It's going to take place sometimes. Also, changing your identity. I was part of a couple, my husband, I went to dental school together. And we had friends, couples that we would go out with and do things with. And, that kind of changes when you're single. So that whole sense of identity, who am I? Fortunately, I was a grandmother, had some grandkids, so I had some diversions, right? But then I'm seeing that change as the grandkids get older. When I walk in the house, instead of saying, Dad, running to me and hugging me, they're kind of like, oh, yeah, hi, Nana.
Hey.
So that's all these things that you never would think about. I mean, I was a pretty tough cookie, and I never thought that would affect me. So
Yeah.
I think that sense of loneliness, the grief, there's a grief, even if it was someone that you were just kind of happy to have divorced, there's still a grief. There's a grief of the loss of the relationship. There's a grief of the loss of the family unit. And I think just expecting that and knowing that you can get your way out of that grief pit. You have to claw, you have to crawl and scream and fight it out. It doesn't just happen by itself. You have to work at it, but you can get out of that grief pit and you can live a life of joy and living in the present again. Might not seem like it right away, but if you really fight and work at it, you can get there.
Right. And that's such an important message. I remember I was after my husband passed away, I was driving and a deer, this was in the middle of the day, a deer jumped out in front of me. Its head came through my windshield, like the horns were stuck in my dashboard. I was going like 75 and it flipped over my car. And I can remember just sitting there on the side of the road going, I don't even have somebody to call that I can come and pick me up. Now I did, but I mean, my neighbors came, but you know what I mean? I just, my mind went blank because you think, oh, I'll just call, you know, the partner or the spouse or whatever. And then all of a sudden it kind of hits home that that's not a person that's there to call right at this moment. So yeah, it is a real experience. And you also talk a little bit, I know in your work, now I'm making a not very gracious pivot here. I know in your work, you deal with conflict quite a bit. And you kind of touched on it in the last statement that even when you maybe are in a high conflict divorce or you maybe don't have a great relationship with your ex, there's still that sense of the loss of what you thought the future was going to look like as a married couple.
Right, exactly. And part of that is forgiveness. I mean, part of the you're going through this this pit, you know, you're in this having this new identity as someone who lost their husband. Naturally, he died of natural causes, and we knew it was coming for a long time. I mean, there was no anger there. But many times in a divorce, and I work with dentists who are divorcing from their the partners who are divorcing, kind of similar. Many times there's anger, and that anger does also go over to grief in many cases. But I learned from the best grief counselors and forgiveness people in the entire world. I lost my son Eric to suicide back in 2009, and I went into that pit of despair. And Jim was still alive. We both went down there for quite some time, and just through an amazing set of circumstances, I ended up bringing libraries through Books for Africa to Rwanda, and I got to meet those amazing people, and I've worked with them since 2011. When I went through the first time, they were only 16 years away from a horrific genocide where their neighbors were killing them, neighbor against neighbor. It wasn't an invading army. It was the people that you knew were killing your entire family, burning down your property and taking all your stuff. That's basically what happened. Horrible, horrible, horrible thing. And most people, when they think about Rwanda, they think only of that. But that is not the story of Rwanda. The story is through forgiveness. Now, how can you forgive a genocide, right? They had justice first. They all went to jail. They went to jail for 20 years. When I first went there were lots of people in pink jumpsuits that were in jail walking down the street. They went to jail for 20 years, and then they were reconciled back into the villages. How do you reconcile the people that killed your family back into your village? How do you do that? But the people of Rwanda decided that if they didn't learn to forgive and to reconcile, their children would face the same challenges they did. They would live in this horrible thing, and maybe there'd be another genocide. So what they did is, by forgiving and reconciling with the perpetrators who did horrific things, they have now currently have one of the safest countries in Africa. In fact, the U.S. State Department recognizes it as a safety level 1, which is the safest type of country to go to. It's the same as Canada. So if you're not afraid to go to Canada, you shouldn't be afraid to go to Rwanda. I mean, most people don't realize that. They think, oh my gosh, Rwanda, it's a wonderful country. Well, myself, right?
Right.
So my point really is that I learned if they can forgive that, and they can reconcile, and they could have joy after it takes a while. I mean, getting out of that grief pit takes people different, maybe months, maybe years, it takes a while. If they can do that, then I can forgive the things associated, with my son's death and with other things that went on in my life. And I learned that by forgiving, I freed myself. I freed my heart. And that was a big part of my journey to joy, getting out of that grief pit and getting to a point where I can live my life joyfully and in the present, which affects everybody around me.
Yes.
Children, they have a Nana that's there. I'm there for them. I'm not living in the pit. I'm not, you live in that shroud where you kind of have that, zombie smile on your face. Looks like you're dying, right? We all go through that. That's part of the healing process. It's part of the grieving process. But I'm not there anymore. I live 100% in the moment, and I can have joy with my children, joy with my grandchildren. It's wonderful for me, but it's also wonderful for the people around me.
Yeah. And that is, thank you for saying that, because no matter, now I can see, we're not saying that this is going to happen overnight. And we're not saying that, you have to choose if you go through a divorce and you've dealt with an abusive spouse and you've been, or you're somebody who has harmed your children or anything like that, that you have to continue to be friends with them, or you have to, go out of your way to be kind to them. What you need to do is you need to let that go for you. You need to stop carrying that, because the more you carry it, if you are hostile and angry at somebody, you're not just hostile and angry at one person. It goes all over your life. There's this horrible contamination that goes all over all your relationships. And that forgiveness just lifts that, bleaches it all out, and you can at least be neutral about your feelings about that person. You don't have to say, oh, what you did was okay. You never have to say that, but you have to let it go for you to be able to, to move forward.
Right. I think having those healthy boundaries is important, because if it's somebody that I have one of my sister-in-laws, her ex-husband is at all the family functions, even, which we think is highly unusual, but he is, we love him and we just accept him. She accepts him, we have to accept him. Right. But you can have those healthy boundaries where you say, I forgive you, but I'm not letting you back in my life. I'm not going to let you affect my life in that negative way that it was happening before. So it's great. I mean, I really admire my sister-in-law who could just bring the husband back in, which was great for his kids, by the way. So it's a really good thing to do. But I that would be hard for me, I think, in that situation. But so having those healthy boundaries is the important thing. And
nobody has to do what anybody else does. I actually have clients who have worked together, have worked on a lot of stuff. They work with me, and then they've gone on and worked with other coaches or therapists or communications experts or couples, whatever. And they have managed to build a wonderful friendship where they actually do things like go on vacations together. Now they don't, obviously, they rent different places to stay, but, there is the potential to do this if there's not danger or concerns or mental or physical health issues that go along with that. But yeah, you can create your life after loss of any kind the way that you want it to. So I loved your talk about healthy boundaries. What are some of the other things that you think might be practical steps? Let's say somebody's listening to this and thinking, well, I don't even know how to get started on this forgiveness. What might be something that would be simple and easy to get started on?
Well, I think trying to, we're both mediators, right? So I'm going to speak some mediation language here. When you look at the problems that occur, and this is hard in a divorce because it's your personal relationship that's right in the center, but try to separate the things that the person does from the person. I asked the people, for instance, in Rwanda, how can you forgive genocide? How can you forgive that? Now, they're very spiritual persons, people in Rwanda, and so they put it in a spiritual context, and they said, well, we believe that this person is, controlled by, the devil or evil forces, or however you translate that. And we feel sorry for them. And so we are, we'll try to rehabilitate them, but, we forgive them at least. We might not, be their best friend or have much to do with them, although they are being brought into the communities, but we can choose how to do that with each person, with each relationship. And I think that's a thing, if you can kind of just realize that typically people that do rotten things really are not that happy. I mean, they're not really that happy. The happiest people are the most joyful people, are people that have like freed their souls from all this stuff, right? So, and in some ways, if you can look a little sympathetically, this person's probably not in the best shape psychologically if they're doing the things they're doing. Keep your boundary so that they're not bringing that stuff to you, which is you have to do, but then just forgive them for what they're doing and try to separate the two.
Yeah. I think another thing that I'm going to throw in there, and Kim, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but you have to stop blaming yourself for their behaviors. Like, their behaviors are they chose them. It's their responsibility, and they're going to suffer the consequences. It's not your job to fix your partner or try to make excuses for them or anything else. I think that leads to chronic resentment when I know that, I know, let's say somebody does come to a family function and then they behave badly. I have to just let go. That's not a reflection on me at all. Let them be their own jackass self. Don't even worry about it, right?
No, that's critical. Thank you. That's critical. And also, I think we have to apply that sometimes to other people in our lives, like sometimes they're adult children, sometimes we did all we could do to raise them and get them, on the path that we thought they should be on. And then, sometimes as adults, they stray and we can't be responsible for that. And I think sometimes that really, we take on their problems and we shouldn't do that, especially if it's a spouse, because that is, they're no longer part of your family. So really you can exclude that completely. Children, you have a little bit of you've got that attachment, but with a spouse, you can really he's not part of my family anymore. What he's doing is his, and you have to deal with him on that.
Yeah, and ending that cycle of conflict. If you can approach conversations in a different way, I always say, if your conversations sound like you could just hit a tape recorder and it'd be the same thing playing over and over again, all it takes is one person to do something differently. And all of a sudden, everything else from that point forward changes. It has to change. It can't go the same way.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's fabulous. And as we grow, for instance, as a grandma, I'm old enough now, I'm 68. I do things my way as a grandma, right? Because I've just learned that, and it's not the way everybody else did before, but I kind of do things my way, because we forge our own paths. We don't have to be stuck in the same path that previous generations were stuck in. And that's just so critical. And it's very freeing. It's kind of fun to be. I mean, I just got a new hip, and my words don't come out like they used to. And there's all kinds of things that happen when you get old. But I can have a lot more freedom now, because I've learned over all those years that I don't have to follow everybody else's path. I can just take my own path.
Yeah, and as kind of, I'm going to say this, and I don't know if you like this term, but sort of as a pioneer, as a female in, I'm guessing dentistry is a fairly male-dominated industry. I mean, you rose to the level of being the president of the whole state dental association. Do you feel that some of this ability to do our own path is really the time that we're living in, where maybe 50 years ago that would have been a nice idea, but it really wouldn't have been a possibility? I mean, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. I love that term. Absolutely. And I just give the example for dentistry. 20 years ago, when I was 24 years ago, gosh, I'm really aging myself, but 24 years ago in 2000, I was president. There weren't any women in the whole upper Midwest. I was the first one. But now there were very few women dentists at the time. But now the graduating classes from dental school are more than half women. And
Wow.
I know, amazing, huh? And we could take advantage of my daughter, who was never going to go into dentistry. None of my kids were. Both of us, my husband and I, were dentists. Never going to go into dentistry. Went into, became a lawyer, and now she works in dental law. And so she has benefited from. She does everything a brand new way, instead of having a big, giant, office in downtown Minneapolis, way up on top of a building. She worked from her home because she had 3 kids, right? And she got to the point now where her husband, who had a nice executive job, said, well, he stays home now, and she takes care of her practice from her home. It's completely different than it was before. And as women, I think, get more into the workplace, we're going to adjust and adapt, in our home lives too. As we deal with our families, we're going to adjust and adapt over time. So just because it was done that way before doesn't mean that's the way you need to do it.
Yeah, I really like so many of the women that I have that are, how should I put this, of a certain age. Like, I'm in my 60s, right? And so I can remember when my mom couldn't get a credit card without my dad signing for it. Like, that was 1975 that act came in. And I talked to people about this, and they're like, can't be, that's not, like, yeah, let's go look it up. No, credit card, some of them did give women cards, but they were not required by law to give them cards. They could refuse it simply because there wasn't a man's signature on the as a cosigner or something on the card. So I think the possibilities for creating your own life have never been better, and I hope they just continue to get better.
Yes, I do too. I have 5 granddaughters, so I'm hoping that their life is going to be much easier even than mine. But yeah, we could do pretty much in this country now. There are some cultures where women still are not able to do some of those things. But if you live here in this country and in many other places, you could do what you want to. despite what's been happening in your past.
Yeah, and I think that's freeing. And I think that's one of the reasons, they say the gray divorce, so 55 and up, that's kind of that's the fastest growing group of women that are filing for divorce now. And no, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm not pro-divorce. I'm pro-relationship staying together. But I think, women, if you've been in a relationship for 40 years, it's not fulfilling. Hey, maybe it's time to think about moving on. You have a right to be happy too.
And you have a right to reinvent yourself and do it. Like I was a dentist, and the reason I probably would be retired anyway now, but I had to stop at 54 because I developed a disability, a radiculopathy, or a nerve damage in my drilling fingers, right? Which, I mean, you can't do it anymore, right? So I was full time, and I was the support of my family because my husband was sick, right? So full time practicing to never again in one day. Went to Mayo Clinic, and they said, "Oh, you got nerve damage, you're done."
Wow.
I had to reinvent myself. And I think, so many times, I can't tell you how many times I've reinvented myself, again, because I'm not retiring. I'm just going to keep going. And I'll continue to reinvent myself because as my body ages and I'm not able to I was a speaker, I went all over the world in dentistry, but, that was getting on a plane every single, once or twice a week and going from here to there to here to there was getting a little too much for this, 68-year-old. So now I'm writing and working with my peers and people that are involved in conflict and people who want to build a legacy. I'm working with those people now, and I can do it on Zoom. I'm in my living room. I don't have to run down in the airport, and do all the physical things.
Yes. Yes.
We reinvent.
And you can save money on clothes because you just have to have nice tops. You can be sitting around and you're like,
pants on, I'm just saying, but
yes.
Not attractive.
I have on too. I have shorts on, by the way. Dr. Harms, it has been fantastic speaking with you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And I know we've covered a lot of ground here. What do you want people listening in to remember from our conversation?
So as someone who has been through widowhood and lost a spouse and had to re-identify, I just think that, you as you navigate through life, it's very unpredictable, right? And you're going to have to change, and change is inevitable. It's very, very difficult. And you might find a shift in your lifestyle. Loneliness might creep in. As your identity changes, as your family changes, the children and grandchildren are going to change. It becomes difficult. You might face struggles, and you continue to face struggles as you move forward in life. But please summon up the strength to fight for your mental health. And we just had the Olympics, right? Look at Simone Biles. Oh my gosh, she's just a great example. I get goosebumps when I see her. So summon up that strength, fight and kick and scratch your way back to good health. Get treated for depression if you need to be. I'm treated for depression successfully. I will be treated the rest of my life. I lost my mother and son to suicide. So, I'm being treated, and I know I need to be treated because it's not just important for you, but it's important for everybody around you. So please embrace a journey because resilience breeds hope. You'll find your joy. So please fight for your mental health. Don't allow it to take over.
Lovely, lovely way to sum this up. Kim, if people want to reach out, find out more about what you do or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yes, you can go right to my website, which is Dr. Kimberly Harms, KIMBERLYHARMS.com.
And I will make sure all of that gets in the show notes. Dr. Harms, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. This has been just a real pleasure.
And it's been my pleasure. And I want to thank you all for listening in to the D Shift. And don't forget to tune in again for our next episode. Thanks for listening and supporting the D Shift podcast. If you would like to attend live trainings by our amazing guests and have a chance to ask questions and get answers from our experts, thanks for listening. Join the D Shift podcast. For more details, if you would like to attend live trainings by our amazing guests and have a chance to ask questions and get answers from our experts, join the D Shift crew. For more details and to sign up, head on over to www.divorcecoachforwomen and click on the podcast page.